The thing about this panel is that this is a co-sharing participatory event, what it's to be. So just one moment. I'm hosting this online to everybody in the room. It's just that my screen just went blank the moment there. Just to let you know that the idea here is that we want it to be participatory, because here we are talking about the fact that people should be at the center of this, and people in any action should be in the middle of what we are thinking and considering, and also pushing around us as well, so that we basically are interactive participatory when it comes to our humanitarian work. And we want this panel to be the same way. So throughout this next 90 minutes, we'll be very interested in hearing your thoughts and working with you through either Mentimeter or asking you questions. So this is not just going to be a singular one way. This is going to be a participatory event. So first of all, then, what are we talking about here? We're talking about the idea that when it comes to responses, the design and operation of any response should really involve all the people who are involved in it, especially the people who we are aiming to work and serve and support, as well as just not the decision makers coming in. So when we say people-centered design, the important thing is that it is not one size fits all. The idea is that people are all different. And when you're planning this, it's so simple to come up with the idea that we are serving people, we serve everyone. But when you're serving everyone, how do you distinguish between the different groups, especially, again, groups that may be slightly overlooked, like children or older people? So that is why the Alliance for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action, the Alliance, and NORCAP have come together to bring this about. I mean, the Alliance for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action, it makes humanitarian programs accountable to people and to ensure their meaningful participation, including providing leadership and promoting meaningful action and developing resources and child-driven community action. We also, coming with this is NORCAP. Myself, I am a NORCAP expert myself, and we are specialists that are deployed into humanitarian responses into agencies and organizations to provide expertise, experience, and impetus to help facilitate to make this happen. So this is the general theme working on this. And joining us with us, we're very, very glad, is a huge supporter of this area of work, a huge supporter of accountability with affected populations, which forms one of the frameworks around this. And I have very great pleasure to introduce the topic and give us his thoughts. Charles Antoine Hoffman, who is, as I can see, is sitting by himself on the panel there, on the panel area. So I'm going to hand over now to Charles Antoine, who will grace us with his opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fanan. And indeed, it feels a little bit lonely, but glad to be with many colleagues online and a few as well in the room. So let me start maybe with highlighting a dilemma. We know that children constitute over 40% of affected people in emergencies. We also have clear commitments to child participation in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Yet, despite those commitments and the fact that children constitute a significant portion of those affected by humanitarian crises, the humanitarian community remains particularly blind to the role of children when it comes to our AP commitments. Is there an issue? So I'm talking to myself.
Yes, it looks like we've lost the. Hi there. Yes, it looks like we've lost the video signal. We can still hear you well, but we can't see you anymore.
Right. Okay. At least you have the voice. You may have the picture.
We have audio podcast now, Charles Antoine.
Yeah, I guess the same could be said for other population groups that focus more on children, but I think there's been a lot of work as well for older people and people with disabilities, etc. But let me go a little bit deeper into what is usually recognized as the three pillars of accountability to affected population. On complaints and feedback mechanisms, our approaches are often child blind. For instance, hotlines, complaint boxes, or digital channels are not particularly appropriate channels for children. I don't need to explain why. There are probably some better examples when it comes to participation, which is another important pillar, child participation in particular. But I would say this remains relatively seldom in humanitarian action. We don't take the time to do that as much as we should. And I don't think we pay enough attention when it comes to the provision of information, which is also one of the key pillars. For instance, child-friendly spaces that we see in many emergency responses can play this information provision and feedback function, which we see sometimes happens. But again, this is far from being systematic. So I think there are three questions we need to ask ourselves, and hopefully that will also lead to some of the examples we'll hear from in a few minutes. First, why is accountability to children important? Whose responsibility is this? And are we well equipped to do the right thing? On the first question, why is it important? There's a general assumption that paying particular attention to the views, feedback, and participation of children and their families, and for that matter, any other population group, will ultimately contribute to the quality and effectiveness of our work. Indeed, how can we know whether we are doing the right thing if we don't ask in the first place those we are seeking to support and give them a voice? Yet we have limited evidence to test this assumption. We do have some anecdotal evidence of this via our practices with small adjustments and improvements that we make in our daily work in response and based on children's input. But this is not well documented and certainly far from being systematic in our work. There's, by the way, an interesting report that ALNAP has just published that is looking at this lack of evidence with some interesting findings. And for those who want to go even deeper, there's a session. I don't know if I'm allowed to make any advertisement, but I'll do it anyway. A session on how do we measure the impact of AAP interventions, which is on Thursday, if I'm correct. No, sorry, Wednesday. Anyway, how do we do know for sure that children's view can be very powerful when shared in the right way, as we see via children's involvement in advocacy and policy, for instance, and that it is obviously crucial for children to be able to share feedback and complaints when they are faced with major protection issues like safeguardings or PACA. I think there's a bit of background noise. So the second question, whose responsibility is this? So this may sound like a platitude, but I would argue that this is everyone's responsibility. The point here I'm making is that accountability to children should not be left to child protection experts or education experts alone, but there is a great deal of expertise on AP to draw from with specialists or even practitioners in general. There's a lot of experiences out there. And this is also a leadership responsibility. It's not just a technical area, but we need the commitment from leadership at country level to make this happen. But this is not necessarily about setting up specific AP approaches for children. It is okay, in my view, to have a population-wide approach as long as we pay attention to particular population groups within that. For instance, looking at the particular information and communication needs, the most appropriate channels, etc. So there's a number of things we need to pay attention to, even if it's part of a broader so-called AP approach. Otherwise, we risk missing out on specific groups, particularly children. We risk missing on particular needs as well, and our programs may not be tailored in the right way. And we see that over and over again in humanitarian action. And the last question, are we equipped to do this right? I guess if the answer was yes, of course, we may not be finding ourselves in this room, but I would say it's probably a matter of recognizing that this is an area in which we have underinvested, but there are at the same time some very good examples out there and some tools, good practices, etc. we can draw from. So probably it's an important first step is to make sure we document that, and I know that's been done already, but also replicate that in different contexts. And this is exactly what this session is about, so I won't spend much more time on this. But maybe just to finish off, from a UNICEF perspective, we are also investing in this. You may find it slightly surprising that we haven't done a lot more until today, but that's something we recognize is a weak area, including from our side. And we are definitely committed to doing more. One example I find quite interesting is recently, as part of the Ukraine response, but also in some other contexts in the European and Central Asia region, there's been some work, very interesting work we've done on child-friendly feedback mechanisms and really trying to involve children in designing those systems and really making sure that they are part of the process. So that's something we are committed to taking across the board. I'll leave it there and looking forward to the good discussions.
Thank you very much, Charles-Antoine from UNICEF. That was some thought-provoking ideas for us to take forward here. So actually, I work in Ukraine, so I come across some of the work that UNICEF is doing here, and it's really important to get involved and actually understand how children and different groups are reflected. So, as Charles-Antoine Hoffman just said, to make aid and humanitarian assistance truly inclusive, it really has to be everyone's job to know this and to know those little details, to know the fact that to take a good accountability AAP approach, it is not one size fits all. So AAP approach can be for everyone, but just need to pay attention to the differences between different kinds of people, different types of people, different groups of people. So in the people-centered response, we do need to realize that people are not all the same. You know, that's something, again, we probably take up the idea that we all agree on in principle, but we also know it does not magically happen. It has to be an intention. So let's take up Charles-Antoine's question then. Are we actually equipped to do this? So in what preconditions need to be put in place? What do we need to have put in place so that this happens more automatically? So here we are. You know, this HNPW takes place in a city of decision makers in our area of work. So let's work out here, right in the heart of it, what preconditions we need to make for things happen. Now, for the audience, we would love to hear your thoughts on this as well. So please think about this yourself. We'd like to challenge your thoughts and challenge us by what you are seeing. So before we do this, so one of the things we want to do is just get an initial idea, is not just before we discuss as a panel, is to go to understand what you're thinking through a Mentimeter. So what you should see is in the link there should be a Mentimeter and there should be something on screen. So talking to our wonderful behind the scenes team, can we put the Menti link up? And let's get your initial thoughts about this. So please put, what do you think is needed to be in place at all times, even before response happens, to set the preconditions for response actors, decision makers and response actors, leadership response makers, to actually have a more considered approach for people, for children, to be included as a set, you know, including thoughts of children and participation, or other people as well, other groups that might need special care, like older people and so on. So while you're doing that, working on the Mentimeter, I'd like to introduce to you the panel that will discuss this as well. So joining us very shortly, as you are working on the Mentimeter, we will have Sanjana Kurupu, who is the outgoing Child Accountability Specialist at International Rescue Committee, IRC. Lemlem Abraham, the Age and Inclusion Specialist at Help Age International, Ethiopia. Mary Ombaka, who is a NORCAP Specialist in Education in Emergencies. Chomin Niang, the Myanmar AAPC Community Engagement Working Group co-chair and MO advisor for Plan International Myanmar. And Chrissy Hayes, Child Protection Area Responsibility Coordinator, also in Myanmar. So that will be our panel, and I encourage our panel to take a look at the Mentimeter and take a see. And it's interesting to see already that the old favorite capacity building is right there in the middle, as always. The idea is that we do need to have capacity, but is there anything else? I mean, we're talking about preconditions here, things that need to be put in place that we could encourage, especially leadership, to build a more welcoming environment. It's no secret to say that right now it's a stressed funding environment. So we're talking about practical actions that people need to take that are that probably more on perhaps on the more organizational level, perhaps on a more engagement level with other actors, to put in place these practical actions. I mean, like I said, we all want a more community approach. I think again, I can see capacity building there. Well, anyway, Mary, are you with us? Mary?
Hello, I'm here. I'm available. Yes, thank you.
Yes, hello, Mary. I just thought I'd start with you because I'm guessing that for welcoming environment to in place, you must have some kind of welcoming structure from the host nation. I understand that you've just been working not so long ago in Moldova, and perhaps you can draw some experience and tell us about the preconditions that may have helped use that are necessary for that kind of engagement.
Thank you very much, Fanman. It's true that our welcoming environment is very important, and I'm saying this from the point of view of the various government departments that I've worked with in the respective countries where I have worked. And what I realized in Moldova is that the Minister of Education that I directly worked with was extremely outgoing, was very, very welcoming, and was actually took the lead in ensuring that the partners worked closely together in providing services to the community. But before I say that, I just want to say that, first of all, we need to understand as humanitarian actors that in any situation where we have humanitarian assistance, is the government's prerogative or responsibility first to invite the actors, because it's the government that needs support from the outside players. And so secondly, we need to know that the government takes a very important role in leading and strengthening, in leading and fostering partnerships, and also ensuring that there's proper coordination. But in an ideal situation, this would be the case. But in most cases, most governments may not have this capacity, not because they do not have the resources or the facilities, but because they lack a bit of understanding of what humanitarian assistance is, because for many governments.
Mary, we've lost you there. Are you still there with us? Very, left us on a bit of a cliffhanger here, but about most governments. But I take it that you're talking about most governments are not ready for this,
Providing
or are they
support
ready?
to its
Hi, Mary.
nationals.
Mary, we lost you there for a moment. Can you?
Hello, can you
go
hear
back?
me?
Yes, the last thing we heard, you said most governments do.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, what I'm saying is, in Botswana, for example, the government was very proactive in providing education for its citizens, but during the Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you. We heard it. We can hear you, Mary. We also heard a little bit of talking in the background, but we can hear you quite clearly.
Yeah, there was a bit of noise in the background. Yeah, but during the emergency, the government needed support and capacity building and ensuring that they had all the children on board, or all the necessary beneficiaries, or the people who needed the services, education services included, because the government had never experienced in emergencies before. And so in emergencies, we need to be able to provide the government support. And we can do that by enabling the government, not necessarily taking the lead, because what I've realized is that in many countries, when we go there and act as though we are the leading, or we are the ones who know, then the government behaves as though this is our baby, the humanitarian agencies, and the government takes a back seat. And so we need to be very proactive in ensuring that we do not usurp the government's responsibilities or the government's role in leading in humanitarian assistance. And so this is one thing that I witnessed in Moldova, where the Minister of Education provided leadership and organization and was very proactive in ensuring that education was provided for refugees because they understood their role. And it's because humanitarian agencies had done a lot of lobbying, a lot of advocacy with the government to ensure that the government takes the lead, and the government was also very positive. And so the Minister of Education took the lead, and this was made it very convenient. And also this makes it makes our work very easy and more effective because we are able to provide services instead of going into too much advocacy and too much lobbying. And at the same time, when the humanitarian actors are phasing out, then that becomes much easier because you don't need to start working on sustainability because the government has already got the capacity. They know what their roles are. They have been taking the lead. And so it's much easier for the humanitarian agencies to phase out in a situation where the government knows its role and is supported and their capacities are built and reinforced to provide humanitarian assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really interesting. So, talking about the idea of knowing what's happening, that's involving government is really important. Knowing just what resources are available. Lobbying, that's a good thought. Lobbying, advocacy with government, prioritizing proactivism is good. Moving over to Sanjana, this is something that I suppose mapping on child accountability is something you would know about, I suppose, because you've just have a report on that recently. Is that correct? This is from a part of the Accountability to Children initiative. So,
Yes.
Just going back about the idea of mapping and basically involving governments. By the way, I understand our tech geniuses may have a copy of that report to show. Is that available?
That is, yes, I think Camilla will post it on the chat.
Yeah. Anyway, so tell us about this. Building on what Mary says, can you sort of elaborate on what you found on those lines?
Thanks, Fanman. So the Inclusive and Accountable project started in October of 2023. And the focus countries were Ethiopia and Burkina Faso. Very broadly, what we were looking to understand are barriers, enablers, and best practices in relation to accountability to children and inclusion of adolescent girls with intellectual disabilities. So this was done through qualitative field assessments in IDP settings in both the countries, working with local partners. So we had two partners in Burkina Faso. I see that my colleague Landry from Burkina Faso is also part of the discussion, and with one partner in Ethiopia. So I'm not going to go into details on the research, design, and methodology, just want to capture some top lines that we have from our discussions with the three categories of respondents. That's the children that we spoke to, parents and caregivers, and humanitarian actors. So we spoke to 30 children in each of the countries, 26 parents and caregivers, and humanitarian actors, both in country, at regional and global level. So what did we learn from the children? So our discussions revealed children's concepts that we are familiar and to an extent, I would say, overused, such as children's rights, voice, and agency are not universal concepts. So children did not understand these concepts. Also, they did not see themselves as distinct or as a distinct cohort, or understand why their opinion mattered, why they should participate, and why they should engage. So that was an important pointer for humanitarian actors. Secondly, to an extent, I would also say this is mutually reinforcing, because we say children don't engage. At the same time, humanitarian actors don't have either the expertise, the resources, or the time, especially at emergency onset, for the specific adaptations required to engage with children. Can somebody please mute their mic? I hope everyone can hear me.
We can hear you loud and clear.
You can hear. Okay, great. Second point was with a very what I would call talkative, proactive group of adolescents I spoke to in Ethiopia. they said, let's talk more work, please. So in all these consultations, surveys, feedbacks, and rapid assessments that we do, they had a question for me, interestingly, as to whether we could divert the funds and resources that we had to addressing critical unmet needs, as opposed to multiple rounds of consultation, right? And to work with children and adolescents in service delivery and implementation, rather than, they come in for a consultation, if at all, and after that they are phased out. Thirdly, it was the power differential. So they are acutely aware of this, and I wouldn't say it's a fear, but more of a hesitancy to engage with strangers, with outsiders. They are afraid of not being very articulate, of possibly giving the wrong answer. They are fearful to an extent that services and supplies might be withdrawn if they provide some kind of negative feedback. The fourth one is a recommendation from children in Burkina Faso, and that was that children identify and engage with their peers. So if humanitarian actors really wanted to go in depth and find out what a set of given children in a community really wanted, what their preferences, what their sort of concerns were, that humanitarian actors should work with a smaller group of children and then use them to engage with the wider circle of children. The second group were parents and caregivers, and again, they saw themselves as intermediaries. So they said humanitarian service provision, yes, we will tell them what our children need, what they require, and what the preferences are. So they didn't see a need for humanitarian staff to have a direct interface with the children themselves. Again, there were some concerns around, do no harm and safeguarding who these outsiders are, what their intentions are, what will happen with this data and information that was collected. The important second point that they made was that, again, they are not very confident of the children's capacity to provide accurate information. The third one was that there is a disconnect in what parents prioritize, parents and caregivers, and what children prioritize. And the example here was that parents wanted the school feeding program to continue because funds had rescinded, but the children wanted school supplies. So the children's preferences do tend to get overrun in instances like this. In our discussions with humanitarian staff, the important point made was that staff commitment and uptake was a vital enabler. So however much of money you invest, capacity building, you have very complex CFMs, you have AAP architecture that goes from top to bottom. But if your staff do not see this as a value addition and don't believe in it, then this important information is not going to reach the decision-making table. The second point was that emergency onset is a very critical phase. So at that point, it is very generic and macro level consultations and assessments that happen. So if you want AAP to happen as per plan, it's important that it's part of your regular development programming and preparedness in particular. So at emergency onset, then you are able to transpose your systems, your mechanism, and deploy your people. The third point is not, this is something that while we're looking at data, we realized. So, and especially looking ahead in these, what I can only call strange times, is allyship, right? So we need to work better together to optimize resources and reach, improve efforts towards collective accountability mechanisms, particularly where we need to better foreground children. And the example I have here is from the Interagency AAP Working Group in Ethiopia that is co-led by IOM and Plan International. Also, that accountability and accountability to children in particular cannot be operationalized in a vacuum, right? It goes hand in hand with inclusion, with safeguarding, with PSEH, and really needs, as we go ahead, a whole systems approach, now more than ever as we look to integrate and mainstream. Thank you, Fanman. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. There's some exceedingly good points there, and especially some of the like I said, preconditions, things we need to get ready and put on the ground. I mean, it's interesting how you mentioned how basically people didn't sort of take into account. I like the idea that you mentioned here. We'll circle back to, which is sometimes children don't want to be involved. So we have one thing which is please involve governments, and also a minor takeaway to think about is what happens when children think they do not want to be involved. How do you get the precondition in place there? Have you got two years? As well as the other one, I noticed you mentioned, of course, lots of this is understanding how it goes, and of course we had, like I said, in our Mentimeter a moment ago, we had a lot of capacity capacity improvement of some sort was one of the highlights in the Menti. But let's go over now to Cho. Cho, are you there?
I am indeed.
Hi, Joe. Yeah, so we've been talking about these preconditions, and you're on the ground there in Myanmar. So we are talking about what makes it. Do you think you would need it for you before you start work? And there, what preconditions have you seen in your context?
I think I would have to echo what everyone else has said before me. Child participation and inclusion in decision making, even in AAP processes, are extremely low. In our experience here in Myanmar, what we've seen at the national level, based on findings from our Community Voices platform, is that children participation is as low as 8%. And even in one of our specific projects, we've seen only 1.7% of informants being children. So that's incredibly low. So that talks about awareness at amongst the staff and the community also about how valued and how important children's participation and children's voices are. And in terms of preconditions, I think a lot of our colleagues in the room have already flagged it in the Mentimeter. Capacity is quite important. And for us in Myanmar, what we've started trying to do together with the CPAOR and the AAP working group is to develop resources that are accessible to different humanitarian actors. So we've got a tip sheet on child-friendly CFMs, and that's been published and shared with the humanitarian community. And we've also developed online courses in Burmese so that the local staff who are on the ground can actually study without actually having to enroll in-person courses, which sometimes in our current circumstances could be extremely challenging. So that talks also again to contextualization of resources, because quite frankly speaking, a lot of the available resources are in English, which is not necessarily accessible for our humanitarian workers, colleagues on the ground. And Sanjana also flagged this. It's also a recognition. We also have to recognize that if we truly want children to participate, we need to understand that we need to invest time, because these are child-friendly processes need to use participatory tools, which means that we have to invest time. And sometimes we just don't have the luxury, or we just think we can't afford to spend the time. So I think those are some of the preconditions that we've seen. But I think for Myanmar, we're starting together with the CPAOR and the AAP working group to understand, to explore ways to build capacity and to raise further awareness amongst the AAP community about how we can actually do this in a way that is beneficial for our children. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. That's interesting thought there. I mean, I want to go to Lem now to give a contrasting view on this, because we've been talking about children, but this is something, the idea of different groups having sort of like being seen as individual. I mean, the basic phrase, of course, is if we include everybody equally, we're basically including nobody, because we're smoothing everybody out. But that's not the, but that's actually is not actually helpful when you're truly putting people in a people-centered response. Now, as a contrast to this, let's Lem works with older people. Lem, may I come to you about from what you've heard before? Do these lessons apply the preconditions to what you do, and is there anything new you can add to the idea of it from the perspective of older people?
Thank you so much, Fan. Yes, as you tried to mention, older people have a lot of capacity that they can contribute for society, including for the protection of children as well as women. There are many importance that we can get by including the most vulnerable people, including older people, in the humanitarian program. The first one is, for example, they can impact on the community resilience. Older people have unique insights and coping strategies that can, strengthen community resilience. When they are actively involved in humanitarian action, they can contribute more sustainable and cultural relevant solution. They can also enhance local leadership and sustainability. Older people are the key local actors with strong networks and trust within the community. Investing in their leadership can enhance long-term local ownership to solution and strengthen social cohesion. Their local knowledge, lived experience, and deep connection to communities to make them essential to create sustainable solution. For example, in the disaster risk reduction, local actors such as older people association have indigenous warnings system and knowledge, and they can communicate risk effectively. They can also, older people have also historical knowledge of coping mechanism, while they can support on this regard, and they can also advocate for accessible shelter evacuation plans and early warning system. As you all know, on the peace and security, older people are often respected figures who can mediate conflict using traditional and faith-based reconciliation practice. For example, in Ethiopia, we have a system called Shimgelena, and whenever there is conflict in the community, older people are asked to mediate and provide resolution. For the protection of women and children, older people are, they are acting as guardians of children. They can also prevent child exploitation and advocate for safe space. As you know, due to the conflict in Ethiopia, many older people are raising many children, and they can also support the community-led child protection works. They can also educate communities on the rights of children, women, using traditional storytelling, religious teachings, and grassroots campaign. In Ethiopia, there are harmful traditional narratives used by many people, and also fairy tales that can contribute to child abuse, and changing this can be a powerful tool for positive change. Older people can support on this regard. This is what I can say. Over to you, Tom. Thanks.
Thank you for that perspective there. So, but we're talking about, when we talk about setting things up, I mean, it's useful to talk to somebody who coordinates, and Chrissy is a coordinator in Myanmar. So when you go there, I mean, how do you get, we have a lot of good ideas here, right? But from a coordinator's point of view, what do we need to set up so that this actually works, so that people can work together and put this centered in? I mean, what do we need to have ready so that when the next response starts, this is ready to go? So what preconditions need to be in place from your perspective as a coordinator?
Yeah, thank you so much, Panman, and thank you to everybody. It's been really interesting listening to all the different perspectives. I think as a coordinator, I mean, my job is to kind of make sure that the whole of the AOR is involved in this. But then, as has been mentioned, I think by several people, particularly in the opening, it's not the responsibility of the Child Protection AOR, but we have taken on the role to lead this. But it's for the whole humanitarian community. It's for all the clusters. It's for all the humanitarian workers. And so we've taken on the role as CPAOR in Myanmar, together with the fantastic work of Cho and the team from Plan International as well, to at least start the lead on this, develop whatever necessary resources and maybe some examples and some best practices. So I'd also like to just build a little bit on what Lemon said about the importance of local partners being involved in this. So the CPAOR in Myanmar, we really promote localisation, and I'll come back to why that's relevant in a second. So we have over half of our members are local and national actors, and they have a unique position, firstly, and I think most importantly, in building trust with the communities. And I think Myanmar is a very nuanced, and all the different regions have very, very different cultures and communities, but local actors have a better understanding and are more likely to build trust. And also they have better access, which I won't go into because it's a little bit sensitive. But under the CPAOR, we've recently established as Cho said earlier, we developed the child-friendly complaints and feedback mechanisms, which was not just for the CPAOR, but it was for all the humanitarian actors. But now we've recently established a small child-friendly AAP task team, which is time-bound. It's not going to be there forever. But basically to strengthen our accountability to children. And I'd just like to flag that within those members that have signed up, the vast majority are from local and national actors. So we expect, it's in its nascent stages right now, but we expect this to be a really rich conversation. We also have INGOs and UNHCR and UNICEF also. In order to genuinely put children in a position of power in decisions that affect their lives, we need to understand the cultural nuances across Myanmar. So localization plays a big role. Secondly, and I won't go into this in very much detail, but I think as has been mentioned by quite a few people here, communities also play a very big role in helping us to understand the best way to engage children. So we have a very, very proactive community level child protection working group, and community level child protection is one of our key activities. We move away from the sort of traditional top-down community child protection committees. We're moving to much more bottom-up. But I won't go into that in great detail, but just to say that within the work of the task team, we expect to involve the CLCP group much more meaningfully to engage communities on the ground, to ask them the cultural nuances that we need to be aware of. As was mentioned by one of our colleagues, that in some places children don't feel like they should be able to speak. So the attitude of kind of children should be seen and not heard, it seems to pervade a lot of different cultures. So we'll be engaging communities a lot to get their advice. And lastly, and I guess most importantly from an AOR perspective, through the task team, we need to pilot different ways to engage children in AAP directly. So this is going to likely require a variety of methods. It's not one size fits all, and it's not just one approach. Like we have the child-friendly complaints mechanisms, that's not enough. So we're going to pilot a few different ideas and maybe try seeing what's effective. And probably we won't recommend that people only use one of these, just the best practice one. We'll aim to sort of give people options so they can weave a few different types of avenues to make sure that the whole humanitarian community is getting the feedback of children. As I mentioned, we have the tip sheet, but we recognise a lot more needs to be done. And children are unique and have legitimate views on not only their needs, but also on the manner of delivery. And that's where the CPAOR comes in, is that we do need to advise our partners on the manner of delivery, because not everyone is going to have access to the same children through the same projects. So as CPAOR, we need to work deliberately and systematically. And we've heard a lot of sort of discussions and participatory approaches, but I think the role of the coordination body is to put these systems in place to ensure that these views are heard. So that'll be the start of the task team, and when we hope to expand that to other clusters as well as the wider CPAOR members and get their feedback. It'll be a work in process, and we don't expect answers or a quick fix. But I think it'll be a really interesting exploration, and I'd love to hear sort of other experiences from other countries, because we do intend to spend quite a bit of time on this with the aim of having some systems and processes in place. I think that's all from me and my initial thoughts based on sort of your question and the role of the AOR and the coordination body in this whole process. So back to you, Fan Man.
I mean, that's really, really, thanks. It's interesting. You've got the idea is that you have these systems in place. It is, I mean, there's no getting around the fact that we all work in a giant bureaucracy. Bureaucratic systems is exactly what we are working in, and if they accept that. And in the world of a bureaucratic system where there are checks, there are systems in place and documents in place and multiple organizations, we need to have a good system in place, and that seems to be really clearly made. And for that, then we can engage communities. Then we got structures to talk to children, if children want to talk to us, of course, because not, as we heard earlier from Sanjana, is that not all children feel they should need to talk to us. So including children's voices can be difficult unless we know how. And of course, as mentioned by a few times, was learning how to have the right people in place early seems to be a precondition. a lot of it is fortunately just having people who can open up and know the fact that engaging children is necessary, and that could be experts like those deployed by NORCAP, and also could also be local communities, even older people living there already engaged in them. But these are some solutions in place. But so these are readily available. We have studies, we can read about them, but there are blockages. So I would like to ask everybody listening now, everybody on the call, we could have another Mentimeter, what are the biggest blockages? What is actually happening right now that is stopping these preconditions being there? Can you name some of these helpers, name some of these blockages? That some of them might need to be sidelined, some of them that need to be pushed away, and sometimes possibly even blockages we need to completely ignore because they're a straw man argument. They're actually distracting us. We spend too much effort on some of them. We don't want to be like what the children said. Why are you spending so much money on surveying and researching and not actually giving actual assistance? So let's see. So let's go through that and see what are the actual real blockages that are stopping us get involved in this. Because it sounds like we have solutions in place. We've been working on this for a very long time. As I'm sure Charles Antoine, who is still sitting there on the podium, has been working on this for a very long time. For many years, half a decade, I think, have we been chatting on this. So where are we with this? Where are we with this? What are the blockages? So while we are looking at this, I mean, the one thing I did mention before was we also say funding is an issue, right? But we are in constrained funding time. So what other things are there? Even when funding is available, I have worked in responses where funding is available and it's not actually happening. So what I'm noticing here, time seems to be one of the things I find interesting. Maybe we can discuss to the panel in a minute, because especially some of the systems put in place take time to be put in place. Experts take time to find. Are they prioritized? Time, how much time there is, political will. Well, we need to engage governments. As Mary mentioned, governments are immensely important quite often in responses. There's a political will there. I see that's coming up now. Funding time, adult-centrism, I think we can take that as one. But definitely, I would say we should discuss this further. So let's go to the panel then. Let's start with Lemlem. Lemlem, what do you think is the major blockage? Can you think of the big blockage for you? What is your big blockage, right? And what do you suggest, what advice can you give to get around it that's stopping what we discussed earlier happening?
Different things can block, but the major can be the barriers these people are facing to access humanitarian services are, I think, the major blockage. For me, for example, attitudinal barriers, physical barriers, and institutional barriers. These are the major blockages that impede people from accessing humanitarian services. Thank you.
Yes, especially working here. I've seen many situations where for both older people and children, hard to access locations, hard to access transport. Transportation is often overlooked as well. But physical barriers beyond just what's immediately in front of you, but also infrastructure. But Sanjana, what about? Can I come to you next and ask if in your studies did you come across anything? What was the major blockage, the big one? Then what advice do you have about what's happening around it?
So referring back to the comment you made, Fanman, on the importance of creating an enabling environment, right? Now, what we also saw is that there's a strong leaning towards child protection when it's accountability to children. So organizations that had strong programming, staff, and investment in child protection tended to fare better than those who did not have a strong child protection focus. And here, the very safeguards that we sometimes tend to put in place, guidelines on do no harm, on child protection, on ethics of working with children, sometimes become too cumbersome and actually become a barrier to engaging with children and supporting child participation. So then how do we compromise? What is the right balance between, ensuring that children are protected and they have a safe space to speak up and to participate, whilst at the same time, especially when we are now again looking at funding constraints, how do we make it more feasible and easier for organizations to prioritize engagement with children. The second finding that we came across through the study was that there was a lot of, although there's a perception that, humanitarian organizations don't engage with children, we don't know what children want, there is a lot of informal level engagement, interaction, and information. But these are not documented, and thereby they don't reach the decision makers, because now in order to document, then you would have to have rather complicated, comprehensive processes in place. But if you talk to frontline staff, they're very aware of what the challenges children face, of their needs, of what they like and dislike. But then this information is not collated and does not reach, like I mentioned before, the relevant, when you look at government, donors, and even high-level organizational staff. So, there are some things that we are doing right, but just that it's not captured. And then the other point I made about some of the safeguards that we have put in place, have the safeguards become barriers? Thank you.
That's really interesting. We talk about sort of like the organizations working in this, and the fact that and about knowledge of engagement and things like that. So I would go to Chrissy then next and say, from the coordinator, how do you sort of what blockages do you see to build on that, on the organizational front, then on a interagency, inter-organization level, that your number one blockage? Does it build on what was Sanjana found, or you've got a new one and how would you recommend we can get around it?
I think there are two that sort of spring to mind, I guess. One of them, and I think this is sort of happening globally more and more often, but projects are often funded for a very short time frame. And within that time frame, donors, people have written their proposals, and this time frame doesn't allow for sufficient consultation. And as it was mentioned very early on, this is not a one-off thing. This is not like towards the end of our project, we will do a quick evaluation. This needs to be at the design of the project. It needs to be throughout implementation, and then it needs to be in the learning at the end of the project. So I think that's one blockage. Another blockage I think that we have, and I think there's a lot of work we can probably do collectively here, is that it's not being seen as the responsibility of the high level management. So the humanitarian country team needs to take ownership of this. And one of the good things about this Community Voices platform that's recently been launched is that we're one of the first countries that is actually directly giving the information from communities to the HCT. But as Cho mentioned, at the moment, children only represent 8% of that. But I think we're piloting this in Myanmar. It's never been done elsewhere. It usually stops at the intercluster coordination group. But here it's really been taken to that high level management. And I think a lot more needs to be done with those high level management to get the buy-in, because these projects are not meeting the needs of the people that we serve, in particular, as you mentioned, different cohorts of those people, one of them being children, unless we have these systems in place and this is buy-in from the high-level management. So I guess those two would be my particular blockages that I foresee going forward in Myanmar, but also I've seen in the past as well, is the time of projects and then the high-level buy-in. So yeah, I think those would be my answers to you, Fan Man. Back to you.
That's really interesting, and I think I should bring in Mary, I think, on this one next, because because you mentioned, of course, we kicked us off by talking about the need to include government and government, sort of to get the buy-in from there, and the time available to both find expertise, build capacity, and connection. That sounds like a big one. I love to get your reflection on that, and also to hear your idea of a number one blockage and solution.
Yeah, okay. Just to add on to that, I think one of the major blockages for children's participation would be the mentality that is available, the mentality within the various communities, and also cultural beliefs of various communities. And I'll give an example of Moldova, where in the Roma community, the parents had to make decisions for children. If you wanted children to go to school, you had to do a lot of campaigns and sensitization with the parents. The parents decided when children should go to school or not. And some would say, why does my child need to go to school? I'm leading a good life and I have not gone to school. And this would exclude children, because if you talk to children, maybe they would have different opinions. And also even making decisions regarding children's vaccination, and which was a precondition for going to school. The parents would have to make that. And so that was a lot of, had to do with the mentality that some children do not have a voice or cannot make responsible decisions. But in situations where children would be allowed to go to school, the other children from various, from communities that were encouraging children to go to school would support the Roma children who are going to school, and that would make a big difference in their continuation of education. And so I think their children played a big role where parents were left on their own. They would not they would not contribute to that as much as children did, because other children within the school would support Roma children or marginalized children who enrolled in school, and these children would be models for other children in their community. So I believe that some of these hindrances or these inhibitions of children, for children to participate, can hinder them a lot, and they can also rob them the voice of speaking out what their needs are. And I'll give an example also where we went with the Minister of Education to a school where Roma children were learning, were getting instruction in the language of instruction. And we found that the learning environment was not very good. And the Minister of Education personnel was very angry that the teachers and the administration in that area were not providing a conducive environment for learning. And while we were in the room, we were talking to each other, but children were just watching and observing. And I happened to mention that these children need to get very good care and very good facilities in order to do well. And suddenly they just started clapping. So if we can try to involve children and ask them what they need and talk to them instead of talking about them and just having discussions or bringing out discussions about them, sometimes even in their own presence, but we are not involving them, we are not encouraging them to participate or to even give their views, then we are actually muting their voices, and that can be very counterproductive on how they eventually make responsible decisions, even in future when they are grown up. Yeah. Thank you.
That's great. I mean, that's really, yeah, it's of course, if you're doing support for children and involving children and get people to buy and understand, buying on the children is absolutely critical. That's a really good point there. But the blockage there seems to be that again, learning and education there, learning, ironically, education project, education with the people where you're working with. That's but that's sounds like some of those things resonate with the description you gave, Chol, earlier about the ability of having engagement tools in place. But what about you? What about your blockage, your number one blockage that has not been mentioned yet that you've had, and what are the issues there that you found that you have to come across again and again, even repeatedly, even still?
Absolutely. I think a lot of it has already been mentioned, but I kind of want to emphasize the importance of awareness at the community level too, because in our experience, what Plan has found is that if we invest the time to engage with the community, to raise their awareness that it's okay for them to provide that feedback, they give that feedback, whether it's just to ask for additional assistance or asking for more information, but then we also normalize normalize the fact that we engage with children, that it's okay for children to be in that space, and then also equip the adults with the tools so that they can actually engage with the children, you know, talk to children or give that space and tell the children that it's okay to participate. That's very important too, because in a culture as like Myanmar, it's a very adult-centric, hierarchical society. So that's been, one of the things that we've come up across again and again, as you've asked, and in conditions where we work, there's disruptions. We've been in a condition of protracted conflict, so the children are deeply traumatized. So we've got to work with the community, invest time, and have patience to talk to both parents, to caregivers, and to children, and create that space and welcome them to give their feedback. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it sounds like one of the blockages is something that's really hard to beat. There, it's time. Time is basically the resource that cannot be refunded, cannot be bought. Time is the issue here that we have. So, based on that, I would like to. Next question is, I would like to ask the audience. So, we've been talking amongst ourselves here. So, I'm going to ask the audience here, and hopefully, somebody here will volunteer and stand up, because I want to ask you. Is that one of the biggest problems we have, as we mentioned before, the one that came up a lot in the previous one was time. There never seems to be enough time. I think Chrissy was the one who mentioned it was we have a short amount of time. We take to investment to set these things up. We need to take time to lobby, and if you've got 6 month issue, how would people in the audience who've worked in this area, please put your hands up, consider the impact of how important is time, and how do we work around that? How do we get effective work done in time? So before we talk to the panel about that, does anyone from the audience would like to comment on that or give some thoughts? Anyone at all? Any questions along those lines? Anyone there? Oh, we have a hand up. So Claire O'Kane, do you mind turning your microphone on and have a chat with us?
Hi, yeah, I'm here from Proticnon, and one of the things we found looking at this that I think Sanjana indicated again was building time into emergency preparedness, particularly around the facilitation and kind of capacity of staff. If staff have already, like, we recognise that at the height of a humanitarian response, it's not the time to start doing capacity building on some issues, but often in the emergency, as part of emergency preparedness, there's a lot more time for building that kind of confidence and skill set. And also I think that at both in preparedness, but also at the height of response, of actually recognising what's already going on, which children and youth groups are already active, which community groups are already active, and really recognise, like, at least taking time to recognise and build upon those, because I think otherwise, again, there's been the good emphasis on localisation, but sometimes external people rush in and start doing something new without really recognising young people are often actually already involved in the response and already have their own mechanisms for sharing feedback. So just to take some time, both in the preparedness and at the height of an emergency. Thanks.
Great, that's great. But anyone else, any more thoughts on this? Anyone else had any more thoughts on this? About overcoming this? And perhaps someone from the panel, anyone on the panel would like to comment on that? Perhaps Chrissy, do you have thoughts about that as somebody who has worked with many agencies?
Yeah, I was thinking. I mean, I was kind of the one who brought up time as being one of the big issues. I think, yeah. I mean, I think what was it, Claire? Was it what she said about emergency preparedness is very, very important. I mean, also, as Cho said, though, we're in a protracted crisis now. So I feel like if we haven't done it yet, we still need to make the time. And as I said, I think that it will make it a lot easier if this decision was being made at the higher levels. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I think that's where people get stuck. I mean, my AOR members are very committed to this. They're all very active, but they're not the ones making the decisions. They're not the ones writing proposals. They're not the ones writing the timelines in those proposals and in those short-term projects. So I think it needs to be much wider than amongst the cluster system. It needs to be to those people in the organisation who are making decisions, but also who are doing monitoring, evaluation, and learning, also those who are doing proposal writing. Like, I think it needs to be something that we can produce. And my experience as a CPAOR coordinator, not only here in Myanmar, but previously, is that I think we often spend a lot of time writing these big guidebooks. We produce these big studies, and, you know, someone shares something to me and it's like 75 pages. I'm like, I really just don't even have time to read that. That is not going to be helpful. So one of the things we do in the CPAOR, and not only with this, but this is something that we considered when we did the tip sheet, was that we kind of have a rule that any sort of resources that we make, it has to be less than 5 pages. So if you can't print it out in 2 pieces of paper, then it's too long. And especially if it's something like a tip sheet, like our child-friendly complaints and feedback tip sheet, if guys are going out to the field to use this and trying to implement it, because it can be referenced in donor proposals, so it's quite useful because it's published. But if they're actually trying to use it, let's not give them a 70-page document. You know, let's give them some tips, and let that be able to be implemented easily. And especially when we reach out to other clusters who may not be as child-focused as the CPAOR, but still engage children, how can we make these systems and processes simple and easy to use in the absence of having the time for these long trainings? So I guess that's something, just listening to everybody, I guess that I was sort of thinking as well, as we overcomplicate matters sometimes, whereas we can really simplify it and make that more accessible to the wider community. Hope that answered your question, Fanman. I got a bit digressed.
It does. It just reminds me of a couple of thoughts on that, which I will. I mean, I would like. I'm going to give this to the RC audience for their thoughts as well in a moment. But I want to throw something back to you in a bit of fun. Your 75-page guidebook, which full of detail, policy, and background, but very little actual practical advice. But it's in there. Would you consider putting the whole lot of ChatGPT and say, please summarize into 5 pages?
Yes, I would. You can still attach the 35 pages, 70 pages if you really think I might have time, if you think I'm not that busy, but at least summarize the key points for me in maximum of 5 pages, preferably 4, so I can print out 2 pieces of paper. But if you have to go to 5, I'll forgive you.
But no, would you trust ChatGPT to do it?
No, I would not. I think think like and it's not only with this topic, I think it's with a lot of things. We do spend a lot of time, but to be honest, it takes more time to make it at 5 pages than it does to make it 70. And it's really about, what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to get our logos on some big document, or are we actually trying to reach people in the field that aren't coming to my AOR meetings because they're field staff, but they're going to get that document? We always get it translated. It's in both Myanmar language and English. And we just want it to get as far wider reach as possible, both within the AOR, but also with other clusters. Yeah.
Yeah. So just a quick thought there to anybody out there who does. Is the problem that we overcomplicate things? Does anybody want to comment on that from the audience? I'm just going back to the audience now. Anybody want to comment on the idea that quite often it is us ourselves that complicate something, because people on the ground may actually want some simple, practical guide, something that's a nuts and bolts, very this, then do this, then do this, and then they can find out more. So does anybody want to comment on that? So, by the way, if you notice there's some comments in the chat. I can't multitask very well, so I would say that I'm going to ask if the people in the chat would mind. Yes, Marion, it's exactly what I was hoping for. Can you just call us in?
Okay, thank you very much. Indeed, it's very insightful to listen to all the panelists. Very great contributions. In addition to what Chris has highlighted, indeed, When working, for example, with children, with adolescents and young people, it's important to mind the language, simplify and make the document very short so that they can be able to use it for translation into different local languages, which can enhance accessibility. As it has been highlighted, for example, a document can be or a guidance can be in English, but is it accessible? So for children also, it's about even reading for them and trying to gauge and see whether they are understanding. But indeed, all these suggestions are really important and I've enjoyed the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. We love your contribution. And I want to return to a topic I was mentioned earlier, which is one of the issues, two issues we had, and we're going to discuss both of these, I feel, that a little bit more exploration. One is the fact that children don't want to be engaged. We want to engage children. Children don't want to be engaged unless we make them engage in some way, which that sounded quite a little bit wrong, but effectively build an environment to be engaged, I would say, cooperative. Secondly, is that when we work through them, right? When we work with them, is how to get the information to be shared. And understand that to do this, right, is the fear aspect of working with children. Children quite often are seeing, particularly working with children, seen as a very specialist area, and therefore the average worker, a humanitarian worker, shouldn't get involved without a child expert. Sometimes confused with child protection. Child protection is important, but working with children, including them, are also separate things. So I'll be interested to hear the thoughts of people about, a key tip. How do you get children engaged when we've just heard that quite often children don't want to be engaged? They want to go, why are you talking to us? And parents go, we're in charge. How do you get to that environment where children can be engaged in a meaningful way, where children want to be engaged? I understand that. So I would like to hear the thoughts of the audience as well on this, right? But before we go there, so maybe go up to the panel and perhaps Mary, have you any thoughts about that, or Chol, any thoughts about that? I'm going to go there.
I think that it's very important to understand that if we decide that we are leaving the parents to make decisions for children, they can do that. But the point is, engagement of children is very important. First of all, for them to know that we recognize them as people who can make decisions. We appreciate what they are able to contribute.
How do we get there, though? How do we do it? Because overcome that barrier that Sanjana noticed, which was children feel that they should not be engaged. How do you build that trust? How do you get to that point?
Yeah, first of all, we have to find channels or entry points or windows through which we can get to them. We need to know what interests them, because maybe we are not as somebody as maybe said, the language we are using, the channels we are using, that even the attitude we have toward them. We have to make them understand that we need their contributions, that we appreciate them, that we believe that their views are very important. And that we recognize that they have issues that they themselves understand, which we do not understand, and which they can also give us views and suggestions on how we need to deal with. So we need to get to their level. And
would you say, though, also working with the authorities like you did, so that you get buy-in from the people the children are used to, so they get permission as well from their parents and their teachers, because that's what you seem to have done. And do you think that was a useful step?
Yes, that was a useful step, because first of all, where let me give an example of the Minister of Education. If the Minister of Education is able to go through teachers and the school administrators, then this would also be a very good way of engaging children, because teachers are people who have spent a lot of time with children, sometimes even more than parents. And so and also children recognize teachers as very important to them. They respect what teachers tell them. And so that would be a good way of doing it. And also lobbying with the Minister of Education, building their capacity on ensuring that the policies that they employ are favorable to having children engaged. And a good example is I worked with the Minister of Education or a government that would not allow humanitarian actors to talk directly to children without permission from the government. And you had to get permission even to do assessments with children, because if you decided to do assessments with children, you had to get permission from the government. And so we need to know, to have a way of getting to the children, probably using the government, lobbying with the government, building the capacity of the government to have policies that make us accessible to the children, or children accessible to the actors, to the humanitarian actors, so that we don't have these barriers that hinder us from accessing children. And as I mentioned earlier, where we do not treat children as just objects we are discussing about without their participation and without their contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Sanjana, do you have some thoughts on this? I take it.
But I think Caroline was before me, Fanman, so maybe she can go first.
Caroline, the floor is yours.
That would be Carolyn to you, Fanman.
Carolyn, sorry. Again, I was just listening, so my
Thanks,
apologies. I didn't see this.
That's all right. Thanks, Sanjana, also. Yeah, I mean, I think the principles that make for building good relationships with adults in accountability applies to children as well. If we want them to feel empowered, then not only do we listen to them, we give them responsibility. We act on what they tell us, and then they see that we've acted on what they tell us, and that encourages them. I also think, and this goes to what Mary was saying, that in a way it goes to what Mary was saying, that we need to work with the adults around children. When I was deployed to UNICEF for its Northwest Syria response, I went with the education team to schools, and I consulted with children who were students in the schools. And at one point I was asking them, well, what is it that you need, you think, to help you learn better? And by the time the third or fourth child said, we need anatomical skeletons, it was very clear that the teachers had coached them on what to say. So, I mean, I think teachers, they are indeed powerfully influential, but that can sometimes be good and sometimes can stifle children's own voices. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Carolyn. Yes, it is. This is part of the capacity building, I suppose, that we've been discussing before about understanding the idea of back to preconditions, making sure everyone understands where we are with this. But Sanjana, over to you.
Thanks, Fanman. Linking also to what Carolyn just said. So I think contextual analysis is an important factor of whoever the organization that is operating within a humanitarian response, what the social norms, cultural practices, and beliefs are, how are children viewed within that given community, especially in contrast to sort of what the development sector discourse says about, children are important, children need to participate, we need to foreground children, but we need to understand within a given community how children are situated, so that then we work at multiple levels. It's not just the child that we are trying to convince or speak to on why it's important that children engage, why children should contribute to program design. So it's multi-layered, and in many instances, even within the same organization, you have one set of staff who's doing the needs assessment. They exit, the next set of staff come and do the project implementation. So trust building is lost there. And in the context of current multiple overlapping crises, where humanitarian staff and financial resources are stretched, and protracted crises, which in fact gives us a longer time period to work with communities, to understand them, understand their challenges, and support parents, caregivers, community leaders to support child participation. And I'm quoting Claire here on looking at a more child collaborative approach rather than a child-led approach. We are burdening the children, please participate. It's almost mandatory that you participate. But how do we work with them so that they can speak up, so that they can use feedback and complaint mechanisms and contribute? Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to throw a final point to Cho as well, which is that quite often we've mentioned the barriers, people are not fearful, worried about working with children. So of course this is cross-cutting towards every sector and every program we work in. But how do we saying, oh, there's some children here, I should get the specialist in, and if they're not here, I just work with the adults. How do you get over that hiccup? Any thoughts about that, Cho, as you work in a large response?
Sure, it's a very good question, and it talks about the building blocks, as everyone has been saying. We don't wait until the emergency comes to us, so we talk about we need to consider how we can equip our staff, our team on the ground, even before the emergency happens. And so we can we talk about preparedness. So this is one of the essential building blocks. So we talk about CFM, and we talk about AAP, but we also say, okay, well, in that process, how are you going to think about the children's participation? How are the ways that you can engage? What are the tools that you can use? And then have it available as a toolkit, or just have it at the back of their mind, so that if and when an emergency does happen, they can say, oh, well, we're not trying to flail around, trying to find the specialist to do it for us. We have the basic building blocks, we have the basic concepts, and we can go and do it. And we can then have the specialist come in and backstop us if and when it's necessary. So I think it's about different steps where we build it up so that we're not just caught short-handed. But that also sort of speaks to our willingness, management and the organization's willingness to invest ahead of time. And I think that's a big question for all of us at this point in time. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll leave that question for us to think about, because we're now coming to the point where we want to pull everything together. And we're very lucky to have Bonaventure Sokfo here, who's the Policy and Outreach Senior Advisor for the CHS Alliance. And he will be he's been listening very intently to everything we've been saying, and he's been pulling together thoughts. And let's hear his final thoughts to reflect back on our discussion today.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Very clearly, thank you.
Great, thank you. I want to say first, thank you for organizing this discussion that I find very, very rich. I'm very happy to see the diversity of context that we have covered, from Moldova, Ethiopia, Myanmar, Burkina Faso. This is something that is important, because you will see in the way I will approach this, the diversity is very important for me. Before I do this, I would like also to come back to one of the questions Charles Atwan asked at the beginning. Why are we doing this? I think he has answered the question. I just wanted to add to it that, in addition to this is the right thing to do, we also need to remember that we have been children in our life. We can remember some of the frustration we might have when we have been stopped from participating in some of the decisions that have been taken for us. And my second point is that children we see today will become adults tomorrow. So the way we are working with them is very important to build the tomorrow community. I have been very happy to hear some of the progresses that we have mentioned during this workshop. I have heard things from progress on coordination, on government engagement, children-friendly feedback mechanism, importantly, speaking children languages, finding the right channels to speak to children. I found that very interesting. I have some takeaways that I wanted to share with you. I hope you will join me on that. One, the first one is I heard a lot of discussion about building trust between aid workers and people. And that is something that is very important to me to see that you have mentioned this element, the attitude we are having. I think it's good to have a lot of tools, all these things, but in the the view from the children will be what is the attitude we are having with them. Are we giving them an attitude that is making them safe? You talk about this fear of children to participate. Are we doing this in a way that they feel confident? So the people they see every day, the frontline staff, how are we building them to do that? We have talked about the culture. This is very I'm passionate about that because we might see the culture as a barrier because we go to in a culture where children are not considered as decision makers. So there will be other people who will take decision on them. But if we come back to a second takeaway is building enabling environment. If we work in the way that we start creating this environment where they see themselves, oh, they are being considered as someone who can be listened to, that will change the thing. I have a small story about that. I was in GRC, I was doing an evaluation. And then in my process, I always ask to talk to people who are being affected by the program that is being done. They said, oh, yeah, this is education program, but will you be able to talk to children? You're like, I'm happy. They took me to the children. In the same country, I found two different elements. There was one part where the children felt very shy to speak to strangers or adults when we bring them together. I have been in another area where we arrived, the children were very vocal. They were talking. They was surprised. I asked what happened here. And then the children told me, yeah, you know, we have been informed that we have rights. They told us where we can find our rights. We have been involved in the design of our school, all these things. By doing this, you are creating the environment for them to do this. We need to do that all the time, creating this environment. My last point was also mentioned that accountability to children doesn't operate in isolation. It's connected to many other things, safeguarding and all the other things. This is what is bringing me to the core humanitarian standard, where you see the first commitment and the first requirement in the standard is about inclusion. So we cannot just operate in isolation. We will connect that to other things. This is taking me to another point where we say, oh, we need time in emergency. Do we have capacity to do that? I will say if we are working in a way that we are creating within our organization a system that will allow us to operate quickly, we will be able to do that. It's the same thing for participation. When people will say participation is something for development or when you have time, something that not emergency, but it links to the attitude of the organization, the policies that have been put there, the mechanism and capacity that have been built in the organization. I like the element that I've mentioned about the leadership in the organization. We need to have everyone at each level has something to do to enable these things. These are my things. To finish, I also like your question about whose responsibility is this. I would like to say this is a responsibility for all of us. All of us. We know experts might help us, but if I go to a place where there is no children specific organization working, but I have children in front of me, I have children in the camp, I have children affected, I need to work in a way that they feel confident they are listened to. So I think we should all be interested in knowing how do we approach this when that will come to us. Thank you very much. Again, thank you for today.
Thank you much. Well, we've reached the end of our time now. We've got sort of a minute after, but I just want to spend a little time to thank everybody for coming, and Charles-Antoine Hoffman from UNICEF, Lemlem Abraham from Age Inclusion Specialist at Help Age International, and Sanjana Kurupuru, the outgoing Child Accountability Specialist at ARC, Chrissy Hayes, the Plan Myanmar Cho Min Yang, the MER advisor, Mary Okumba, NORCAP Education Emergency Specialist, and I've been Fan Man Thang from NORCAP as well, AAP. So thank you very much for attending. We hope you found something useful. We're really glad you joined us, and thank you very much and have a good night.